And I said to myself, I would rather feel sad than feel nothing at all
Yeah.
because it was bad. I was like, I don't feel anything. I went on a date with this girl, and guys, welcome to the Tested Men episode 2. And I'm here with Chin. We've got a few topics we want to cover today, ranging from bioenergetics, so how the mind and the body are interconnected, and how stress in the mind can show up physically and also be treated through physical means. Also, we want to go into trauma and an issue that many men face called PSSD, where essentially men can feel numb and hedonic, in which they don't feel any emotions at all. And again, how trauma could be used or is being used to control the masses. So I'm going to quickly jump into it here with Chin. Mind-body connection. Now, you're reading Language of the Body by Alexander Lowen.
I am indeed.
Let's break
I
that
have it
down.
right here. So it's very much in depth of the psychosomatic connection in how it works. It works. It's going on about both ways. So how the psychic connection can affect the body, but also how the body can affect the mind. So, for example, sexual repression can be shown in the body by your pelvis being tilted back because of your lack of hip mobility to move in a thrusting position. So it sounds like quite a trivial thing, but it does have quite a profound effect on your sexual release, and you do manage to store that tension in quite weird ways.
Yeah. In people with pelvic floor dysfunction, anterior pelvic tilt is actually a big one that people have to work on in order to fix their pelvic floor region. So that's a big one. So exercises such as a Hindi squat is a very, very common one, breathing into the deeply into the diaphragm, into the region, and relaxing the pelvic floor, as well as those hip flexor stretches where you put one knee up and then you push into it, squeezing the glutes. And that's something I actually get my clients to do. For the guys that don't know, I work as a personal trainer part-time, and tight hip flexors is a big one. So, yeah, anterior pelvic tilt.
Yeah,
Go more into that. And
so the lower body actually plays the most important role in the discharge of energy. So a lot of this book talks about is the pendulemic swing of charge and discharge of energy. Charging is usually done in the top region of the body, so you're intaking food, you're drinking water, you're breathing oxygen, your eyes are perceiving things. All of the input is mainly in the top half of your body, and then the discharge is obviously in the lower half of your body. So taking a shit, busting a nut, it's discharge. What I found most interesting is that the strength and mobility of the lower part of your body actually has a profound effect on your ability to discharge energy. There's multiple case studies of people that have come in with feelings of being out of touch with reality and that they're not grounded. And you can directly relate that to the strength of their legs, because obviously your legs carry you through life, the main locomotive way of moving. And without strong legs, you don't have that strong grounding. And there's a correlation between that feeling of, groundedness and the lack of strength in your legs. So he gets people to punch the sofa, and the symptom is commonly shown that when people punch the sofa, they kind of lift their legs up off the floor, as if to say that they're not grounded. And when they're committing a discharge of energy, they're removing that sense of groundedness for themselves. When he got his clients to do some squatting and some of the exercises you just mentioned, like pelvic floor training, like Hindi squats, also some kind of like musculature work around the hips, glutes, and quads area, their sense of groundedness improved greatly, and they became more in touch with reality. And it showed in their dreams and how they conducted themselves. It's fascinating, honestly.
that's really, really interesting you mentioned that, because I had an issue similar to PSSD, which is post SSRI sexual disorder. And this is a condition that's generally caused by antidepressants, but also it can be inflicted by ashwagandha because it's got a similar mechanism of action, which is the 5-HT1A receptor. when that gets numbed, essentially that's there to regulate how much serotonin is in the brain. And when that doesn't work properly, too much builds up, and then the dopamine gets completely messed up. So you end up with an overabundance of serotonin and not enough dopamine, and that can make people feel numbed out. Relating that into the lower body, my legs are the strongest part. However, I've had issues with balance and issues in regions like my glute medius where it's chronically tight, and that can affect things like the way I walk and also my balance. So, for example, when I'm doing boxing, one way I can turn and give a good punch, but if I try to do it from the other side, I lose balance, I fall over. As you mentioned, that could be interrelated to being grounded. And of course, guys who are suffering from anhedonia, they do tend to be a bit out of touch with reality. One thing that really helped me overcome PSSD, because it is an issue that many guys have, not many people seem to escape from it. It seems to be one of those issues that needs a kind of trigger in order for people to start feeling again. For me, it was being able to cry again. I was taking high doses of ashwagandha. It got to the point where I went to work and I said to myself, I would rather feel sad than feel nothing at all. Because it was bad. I was like, I don't feel anything. I went on a date with this girl and I just did not feel anything at all, including anxiety, which helped in a sense. But then what use is that if you don't have any libido? But relating that into the lower body, I've always had issues, whether it's in my tendons, my balance, muscular tightness in the lower region. Do you know anything in regard to releasing tension in that area?
So it's fascinating you mentioned that, because certain character types develop certain enlarged muscle regions. One character type, for instance, has large calves and large quads because they have to keep themselves constantly tense in their legs. So that kind of ties into your balance issue. When you think of grounding in an electrical sense, for instance, you have a grounding agent so that any excess electricity just kind of goes into the ground and then just disperses. Training and physical exertion, especially of the legs, naturally helps all that energy kind of discharge. There's great emphasis on the orgasm as well. Freud wrote a book entirely about the orgasm and its process. As humans, we're going back to the primal era where we were just cavemen unga-bungering and smashing each other with clubs and shit. The main drive that we had, we used to fuck, eat, and sleep. Everything we did as cavemen was to further the population, survival of the fittest. Go for a hunt, that's so you can survive and reproduce. There's great emphasis on sexual release to help discharge the energy. That this sexual release especially helps when there's another person involved and both parties are experiencing that same sort of meaningful sexual release. It helps you both to discharge pent-up energy that you've got.
Relating that back to PSSD, it is a buildup of emotions. It's like a plug has been shoved in their ability to release the emotions. That's why they're chronically numb. In regards to releasing even the orgasm, because they do not have a libido. That's the biggest issue. Even though it is named as a sexual condition, it affects all aspects of your life. It's your ability to feel, affects your ability to empathize. You go around the world with a sense of apathy. From my experience, because I worked very, very deeply on trying to restore my emotions, for me, the real thing was to get myself to cry again. I remember I was at the gym training at the time, and there was a song that came on. It was by Linkin Park. And now, bear in mind, this was the peak of my anhedonia. I was completely numb, and I was doing squats. Very interesting. The music came on, and I started to feel emotion again. I was like, yo, what is going on? This isn't right. I mean, this is too right. When I went home, I put the song on. The feelings, they rose up, and I let it happen naturally. I let myself cry, and I tell you what, I bawled my eyes out. A good week or two after that, the PSSD disappeared. I had a window of time where I was completely better. I was like, yo, this is the answer. I haven't been able to cry for so long that it's all pent up. And having that trigger that allowed me to tap into those emotions again, allowed me to release them, that got me feeling again. People just need to discharge, and that's the main issue with PSSD.
Recognizing your tension spots as well. Obviously in bioenergetics, it is that psychosomatic connection. If you go through life feeling that you have a burden on your shoulders will round, your neck gets shorter. It sounds cliche, but especially in the sense of crying, you can go through complete anhedonia for weeks and be working against relieving some of that tension, and it will just one day just come out like that. There's a really fascinating case where a woman witnessed her husband crash a plane and he died on impact, unfortunately. She just walked off, no emotion. She went into complete shock, didn't display any emotion for months. She went to therapy because she was unable to love another man. Didn't work out. She couldn't get that feeling. It took a lot of psychoanalysis to figure out what the problem was. Turns out she was storing a lot of muscular tension in her throat, back of the neck. He was massaging her, and for essentially one session, she just had a complete breakdown, screaming and crying. All of this energy was just released. It does emphasize discharges on the bottom side of your body. You can discharge kind of verbally and emotionally through the head. It's just not as effective. It usually comes as a byproduct of subsequent discharge. Once you release the tension, kind of sort your structure out, it just comes in a flood randomly one day. Afterwards, she was able to form meaningful connections.
The main theory for PSSD is that the 5-HT1A receptor gets blunted. I was doing some research before, and chronic amounts of high stress can also blunt the receptor. My theory is that while these antidepressants kick people into that stage where they get completely blunted, it is chronic stress, trauma of the past. That's what keeps them there. These traumas that essentially numb their body. Bioenergetics can be so powerful. For the guys who don't know, bioenergetics is essentially catharsis. So it's the release of energy, whether it's pent-up emotions, repressed feelings, through physical means, vibration, so breaking up muscular tension, movement. It could be through screaming. It's getting it out of your system. One really good technique to actually get you crying. Now, I did this when I had anhedonia. I looked in the mirror, I looked myself in the eyes, and I just kept repeating, why? Why? Why, 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 why? And eventually some emotion, it starts to creep up in there. You're staring yourself in the mirror saying, why?
And it's like,
and I just burst into tears.
It's like a mix of like methods there. In one sense, you have the bioenergetics of, externalizing this tension and shouting at yourself. But there's also something called active imagination dialogue. It's when you talk to yourself. You can either journal this down or, like what you just said, stare at yourself. When you look in a mirror, you're not looking at yourself. You're looking at like a projected version of yourself. When you can have this conversation between your ego and your psyche, especially when you're asking questions like why. Why is one of the most important questions, if not the most important question. And when your ego is asking your psyche why, because your psyche is subconscious, it's in the back of your head, but when you confront it and say, like, what's going on, you're forcing your mind to think about what the actual problem is, which can lead to outbursts of emotion. So that's a very effective method.
I'm still firm with the belief that in most PSSD cases, it is just bottled up emotions that need to be released. For a while, what I was doing to access these emotions, I'd smoke cannabis. That would give me enough dopamine for a short period of time to feel into my emotions again. Then I put some music on that would make me cry things out. The past few years, I've just been clearing trauma from my mind, asking for forgiveness, repenting. If you're religious, that's a big one. And what I found is the more I've been able to get out of my system, the more in touch with reality I began. An interesting thing is, it's not just people with PSSD who are out of touch with reality. The everyday person is numb. They go about their life robotic. In the book Language of the Body, the schizoid type is representative of PSSD. They're robotic. They don't want to speak to anyone. They walk robotically, emotionally numb. They are repressing these feelings. Not just people with PSSD. It is the average person, and I blame that largely to trauma. And unfortunately, it appears that big movements are using trauma to weaponize people against each other. The vegan movement, you look at Game Changers, they create trauma in people's minds to get people plant-based. Don't get me wrong, there is cruel stuff that happens, but there are ways to have sustainable farming that are not so cruel. They basically use trauma tactics to make people think, how dare I be part of this system that is torturing animals? I eat meat, but I don't want an animal to, get tortured. Hell no. It's kind of sad how these techniques are being used. A big one as well, I will not go deep into, is race, largely run off traumas. It's being weaponized so that we fight against each other rather than stand united.
There's a lot of situations like that, divide in multiple different categories, male versus female, black versus white, vegans versus meat eaters. Large topics are being separated into these binary yes or no that you see in politics, Republican, Democrat. These topics are so full of nuance, differential opinions that you can't just box them into one or the other. Everything requires balance, civil discourse and agreements.
Yeah.
It does seem as though these social wars are being fueled by forced fear. The easiest emotion to manipulate in a human. I've never seen Game Changers personally, but I can imagine there's a few grotesque images of animals.
100%.
And when you're seeing that shit on screen, it's like I don't blame anyone for being vegan after seeing that. But you need to separate your emotions sometimes and think rationally. If it's free for you, then you're the customer. You watching the media gets them money. Fear, it gets you hooked. You see what they're doing with the weather now. In the UK, we've had this heat wave. They used to have nice happy sun images and all these pretty pictures. Now it's just big red scary symbols. You're going to die if you go outside because it's hot.
The key thing to take into consideration is that everyone is being hit hard in this. Going back to PSSD, because I do want to emphasize it, is to look at it in terms of like a binary scale. Someone with a PSSD is operating on about 0 to 20%. The average person is operating at about 60 to 80%. Only the people 80% plus, they're the people who are more in touch with reality, and they're going to be the people who are more geared towards achieving their goal in life, their mission. Below that is just in a state of trauma. The further you go down the scale, the more it affects you, to the point where it can be complete apathy, complete numbness. That can affect things like sexual function.
When we mention trauma, it doesn't necessarily have to mean something heavy impact, like a family member passing or something traumatic that happened to you as a child. Especially when you do have the high impact trauma, when you don't address it and recognize that it's a problem. It's the same with an addiction. If you don't recognize that you have the addiction, you can't begin working on it. One of the biggest things for us right now is that a lot of people are, like you said, just walking around robotic in this state of hypnosis. Most of them don't even know that they have trauma. Even if something severe has happened to them, they're not aware, which is worrying.
Yeah. One of the biggest breakthroughs that I had was when I was running psychedelics. It was something that brought up trauma from school. I was bullied pretty hard, and a lot of that affected me, my personality and how I saw myself. It was only until I managed to clear that out of my system, my esteem, I could start to build that up. We'll discuss psychedelia in another It Quits right now, but thank you very much, guys, for tuning in. We'll catch you on the next episode.
Thanks for listening.